Hello everyone! So before I get to the point of this video, I would like to give a shout out to my friend Emmy for making me this dress. Look at this dress! I'm gonna stand on my bed. So I think now is a good time to explain everything that has happened. Japan in general, with my job, with my location. I would like to talk about the coronavirus situation in Japan from my experience, from how I experienced it. So let us begin. Okay, so I think where I'd like to start is February. Now I'm gonna fact check myself later on all these dates, but back in February I was working for an eikaiwa, so I was working for my old job, and one day we got an email that said there would not be any more kids classes for 2 weeks or something. This was their response to President Abe's instructions that public schools would close. So public schools closed, all the kids were at home, and then my company, which is a private language school, a conversational school, they followed the instructions and they shut down all the kids' classes. At this time, just to talk about like emotionally what was going on, my contract ended March 31st. So I had been working at the school for about 6 months, and I'd formed really close relationships with my students. I loved my students so much, still miss a lot of them. And I started freaking out because March 31st was the end of my job contract. I had decided not to renew my job contract because I had accepted a job as an au pair and made plans to move to France. Yeah, we're just throwing this information in here. I had made plans to move to France to live with this family in August of this year, so August 2020. I'm just gonna be honest, like, I didn't love my job, like my old job. I loved teaching. I do love teaching very much, but it was something about my commute, just like the routine of it. I don't really like routine. It was exhausting, the hours. My whole schedule was thrown. I didn't have a real eating schedule. I would get back home at around 11 p.m. and I didn't know what to eat, like, because I'm like, is this dinner or this isn't a healthy time to be eating? I couldn't exercise really. So I wasn't in a good place mentally or physically when I worked this job. So I decided I was going to leave the job and go back to the US and then go to France, where I thought like things would be much better for me, living with a family and working with kids and getting to have a more relaxed lifestyle. I told my family I'm gonna come back in May. I'm going to end my job March 31st. I'm going to travel around Japan in April and the beginning of May and spend time with my friends. Make all this content for YouTube, all these vlogs of traveling. I'm going to make all those things that I didn't have time to make before. And then I'm going to leave Japan and go back to the US feeling really happy about my time and have a really positive feeling. I'm gonna experience hanami and cherry blossoms, and I just wanna have the best farewell to Japan that I can, because for so long in Japan I was unhappy and I really wanted to end on a high note. Oh my God, I think you can see where this is going. That was the plan. But I never actually bought a plane ticket. I told my mom I was going to come back in time for Mother's Day, and I had decided what flight I was going to purchase, but I never bought it. And the only way that I can describe this was a gut feeling. I know that people sometimes are like, what are you talking about? But everything in my life has been a gut feeling or instincts, intuition. I couldn't buy it. Like, there had been times that I had it pulled up on my computer to buy the ticket and I just couldn't do it. I started to have a change of heart. About Japan because I had met new people and I had formed this routine. I was going to yoga class. I was working on my poetry. I was spending a lot of time with friends and exploring, traveling. I was so happy in Japan, and the language was starting to sink in, and it was starting to make sense to me. Like, everything was starting to make sense to me. Everything that stressed me out so much when I first got to Japan kind of was fading, and I was comfortable and I felt at home. Now, I was feeling like ready to leave my job. It was very exhausting for me, but I started to freak out because they kept extending the amount of time the kids were out of school. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm not gonna get to say goodbye to any of my students. Like, I was seeing the adult students still, they were still coming in, but I was freaking out. Like, I'm not gonna get to say goodbye to them. I'm just gonna leave and they're gonna come back and there's gonna be a new teacher. And I was like, oh my God. I would cry about it. I was stressed about it. And when the students did come back, because they did come back, I was so relieved to see them, but I knew that things weren't getting better in Japan with the coronavirus. So going to work became extremely stressful. I was always teaching in a mask. I never took off the mask while I was teaching. In the workplace, I just didn't feel like anything was clean because the kids' classes, they all touch everything, and the kids don't know how to wash their hands. Like, kids don't know how to not touch their face. Kids don't know how to keep the mask on. So I was overwhelmed, and I'm germophobic, by the way. So before any of this happened, I am germophobic and was stressed sometimes while teaching kids for this reason. Like, the anxiety was out of control when I was teaching during this period. My last week was just this roller coaster of emotion. I remember my last Sunday, my Sunday kids were my favorite kids. Like, they were the cutest little things. It was also my youngest kids, and we had really good relationships. And I was just heartbroken because there hadn't been proper communication about my leaving, and there hadn't been a proper goodbye, and they didn't know I was leaving until that day. And I just remember, like, going to eat my lunch and I was sobbing so much, and I just felt like the world was ending, and I didn't know what to do. And I didn't know what to do because I had decided to leave my job, so I was about to be unemployed, and I was like, oh my God, am I gonna get stuck in Japan and I don't have a job? I was just so confused. I still didn't buy the plane ticket. Okay, so I'm from New York. At this time when I was leaving the job, the situation had rapidly gotten horrible in New York. So much that I was in shock. Like, I would say I was like in a state of shock for weeks about this. I couldn't believe it had gotten that bad in New York in such a short amount of time. And I couldn't think about going on an airplane. I couldn't think about going back there. Everyone was quarantined and we weren't in Japan. So I just was like, I have to stay in Japan, but when is this going to stop? I felt like I should stay in Japan for my safety, but I had no job and my company wouldn't take me back because I had resigned. So it just felt like a disaster. Everything felt like a disaster. There was a period of time between March and April, so sometime in March and April, where the US Embassy issued a statement to English teachers in Japan specifically and said, hey, like, you need to make a decision now. Are you going to stay in Japan or go? Because if you go, you have to go now, like in the next few days, because we don't know if international travel is going to shut down completely. Or you're gonna stay indefinitely. Like no estimate amount of time. They just said indefinitely stay. I talked to my parents, and my parents are so supportive of any decision I make. They've always wanted every decision to be my own, I feel. Like, they don't want me to be able to say, like, oh, you told me to do this, you know? So they always let me make my decision and try to keep all of their personal influence out of it as much as I can, which is hard because my mom really wanted to see me, and she still does, and she still wishes I was home with her. But like, my parents know I feel safer here. But that day, the thought of packing up like my life and my whole apartment, getting on an airplane, which stresses me out more than anything still right now. I don't feel comfortable to go on an airplane. So the idea of packing up the apartment, going on the airplane, doing anything logistical, like with taxes or telling the ward office I'm leaving Japan, and then not getting to say goodbye to my friends and going, that thought was like the worst thought ever. I felt like all my fears were coming true. Again, like, I'm so indecisive, and I had to make this decision like on that day. I felt like really all my nightmares were coming true. So that's how I made the decision. Like, that reality sounded so bad, but that was the reality that would get me back to my family and my country. But I couldn't do it, so I said I have to stay here. Like, it was a gut feeling. I decided to stay, and then I had to figure everything out. So the first thing I did actually that day was, it was a beautiful day and it was peak cherry blossom time. I went to Nijo Castle. I live close to Nijo Castle, and I walked around and I looked at the cherry blossoms, and it was so empty in there. Like, there were no other foreigners in there. It's just like elderly Japanese people walking around. I felt like I was just in a park, but it was Nijo Castle, and there were all these cherry blossoms, and I was walking around and I was like, oh my God, I got lost for 2 hours in there. And I just felt I was surrounded by good omens. Like, this was the right decision. The world is crumbling around me, but right now I'm here walking through Nijo Castle grounds, looking at beautiful cherry blossoms, and I'm safe, and I'm in Japan, and this feels right. It felt really right. Then there were like logistical things. So the first thing was health insurance. I got my health insurance for my job. I no longer was employed, so I needed health insurance. Now, Emmy, literally like an angel, Emmy came with me to the ward office and she got me health insurance. Let me explain the ward office. So if you move to Japan, your ward, or your kind of like district or town, that's the office, like the kind of like the town hall. That's the first place you need to go to tell them that you live there. They need to know that you live there in their town. Everyone who's moved to Japan has that memory of going to the ward office, not knowing Japanese and not being able to communicate with anyone in there, and having to figure this out. I went here with Emmy. It was pouring, and she was gonna get me health insurance. And we went, and she just was absolutely brilliant, and she talked to them, of course, in Japanese, and I couldn't. And she got them to give me a card right there. And I was so grateful for that, because it was so important, because the reason I was staying was coronavirus, and I'm like, oh my god, what if I stay and I got it and like I got sick and I didn't have insurance? That's a nightmare scenario. So I'm so grateful to her for that. She's truly like family to me. And I remember we left and she was like, you went there yourself? Your first day in Japan? How? How did you communicate with them? And I said, I don't know, I really don't remember. I just did. So after that, there was this whole other stress, which has recently been resolved for me. This whole other stress was my visa. So my visa is for 5 years, but I have to be working to keep this visa, and I have to be working for a Japanese company. So I was freaking out because I left my company and now all the schools were closed, so who was even hiring? I did apply to a bunch of jobs, but I mean, a lot of them were public school jobs, and they said like, yeah, we don't know when we're reopening. I didn't really want to go back to work for my company just because of everything that happened. So yeah, that was my thought. Like, what am I gonna do for work? Then I found out a few weeks ago that they had extended anyone's visa. So for me, I told you my visa is 5 years, but you have to be working for the company. So typically, once you leave your company, 3 months later, you have to leave Japan or get a new job. So I'm approaching 3 months later, but they extended that an additional 3 months. So I'm pretty much good to go in Japan doing my online teaching until the end of September, which is a blessing. So yeah, I'm really happy about that. And I'm just really lucky to be employed right now because of the state of the world. That's what's going on with me. And that's why I'm still in Japan. And that's my current situation, is online teaching. But the situation in Japan with coronavirus, okay, we were never like on lockdown. That's one misconception people have when they talk to me, because they knew I was self-isolating, but they didn't know if we were on lockdown. Most people, like their offices told them to work from home, or they were doing it because it was suggested. Like the government, we did have a national emergency. They did suggest that we stay home, and they did tell us like, you should stay home and you should wear a mask. And Japanese people are really good at following these things for the most part. So yeah, we were not on lockdown during the whole time that I was self-isolating. I would go on walks with my friend occasionally, and like we would get ice cream or get a snack. Like a lot of places were open. So it was weird because I knew in the rest of the world that people were strictly locked down and people at home were strictly locked down and all the businesses were closed, but that wasn't the case in Kyoto. So it's just kind of been this strange quarantine, not quarantine. And a few days ago, they lifted it. I got to see my friends the other day, and I have plans to see more of my friends soon. And of course, I'm staying home most of the time because I work at home. But like, we do have this freedom now. My feelings. What are my feelings about being in Japan and watching everything unfold back in the US? So I see a lot of protests, and I see a lot of people doubting the information that's put out there, and I see a lot of conflict, and I see a lot of article sharing and contradictions. Just the way that social media has exploded into this mishmash of information, false information, a lot of it, false information or contradicting information since America went on lockdown has shocked me. Before America was affected by coronavirus, I didn't really see anything on my social media about coronavirus. People were concerned about it that I talked to, and people were being careful, wearing masks, trying to stay home, but no one was sharing all this information. So yeah, I really saw a big change once my country started dealing with it. What I think the big difference is between Japan and the US is just the way that people follow rules and look out for the community. Because when I go out here, yeah, I'll see some people not wearing a mask, but that's rare and a few. Like that's not the majority of people. The majority of people are following the rules, wearing a mask, and actually the government sent us these masks which like they look really funny and they're just like this piece of cloth like slapped on your face, and yeah, I haven't even worn it outside, but the government did send us masks, which I appreciate. Masks are really normal in Japan. I talked about that when I first came here a lot, and people are always saying, Maria, why are you wearing a mask? That's really like unnecessary and weird. Like people from home, they're like, that's so strange. Like, would you ever do that in New York? I said, no, probably not. It's strange. People would probably give me a weird look. Well, now everything's changed. Yeah, but it's just, there's a different mentality about the masks in the US and in Japan. In most of Asia, masks are very normal. If I go to the supermarket, yeah, like everyone's wearing a mask and everyone's standing 6 feet apart online. And yeah, it just feels so civilized. It feels so civilized and so different from what my friends are describing to me in the US. I'm not saying this everywhere. I'm not saying this is everyone's experience, but some people have described to me as like the experience of going to the supermarket now in the US is stressful and they want to avoid it at any cost. That's just one thing. That's not my experience here. Like going to the supermarket feels the same as it always did, and I can go as often as I want, and I was able to go. I wasn't planning these trips like, oh, I'll go once a week while I was self-isolating. No, if I needed something, I went to go get it. Just given the culture of Japan, most people live alone. People wear masks. People naturally social distance. There's not a lot of touching. Of course, in Japan, we bow to each other. So there's not a lot of handshaking. There's not even a lot of like intimacy in Japan. So not a lot of kissing random people on a night out like there is in the US. I'm just gonna say it. In the US and Europe, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of random kissing, there's a lot of random hugging. And unfortunately, in this situation, that's been a really bad thing because in the US and Europe, this illness has spread rapidly. Yeah, I guess in Japan, we kind of have a culture of social distancing and mask wearing and cleanliness. Very clean, very clean. Oh my gosh, I'm seeing these photos in New York of the subways finally being cleaned and how dirty it was. But in Japan, everything's always that clean. Like there's always someone working, cleaning something, the bathrooms or the trains, just, they really care about presentation. So yeah, now people may have some disagreements about this, but in Japan, we have a lot of plastic. So this bothers me because it's terrible for the environment, but like a lot of packaged things, individually wrapped things, like a piece of fruit wrapped in a piece of plastic. I'm like, oh my God, why did you need that? You need a plastic on one banana? Really? But now that all this has happened, I am very happy about it because it means that no one's dirty hands were touching my food because everything's wrapped. So yeah, I just think there are a lot of reasons why it's safer here and a lot of reasons why I feel so comfortable. I'm going to end this by sharing the reasons why I'm glad I stayed in Japan. Number one, I've had this beautiful time to focus on myself. So I've used this time to focus on myself spiritually, to focus on myself career-wise, goal-setting-wise, language learning-wise. Just, I've had all this great time to focus on myself and I've used it. So I'm really grateful for that. Number 2 is my friends. I would have been heartbroken if I left Japan not knowing when I'd ever be able to come back and I hadn't seen my friends. So if I hadn't been able to say goodbye, if I hadn't been able to say goodbye to my friends or spend time with them again. Now I have this time here and I know I can see them again. I know we can spend time together again and I'm really excited because I almost lost all that and they're so important to me and they're like a family to me. So my third thing, I already mentioned this, but the opportunity to learn. So this tied into the focus on myself, the opportunity to learn. I've been able to learn a lot of language. Not only am I studying Japanese, but I'm studying French. So I'm being able to hone in on my language skills. And also I'm able to learn about what I want in the future, like what I want for my life and what I want for a career. I'm really happy that I stayed because, believe it or not, and I wouldn't just say this if I didn't mean it, but I feel like this is one of the happiest times of my life, and there's so many horrible things happening around me, but I just feel happy about my decision and I feel confident in it and I feel happy about what I'm learning and what I'm doing and the foundation I'm setting for myself. And I miss my family so much and I miss my friends in the US so much, but we're all in isolation from each other. We're not going to be able to socialize the way we used to for a while, so I might as well be here and see my friends in Japan and cherish the time with them. I might as well, because if I went home, it would be a whole different type of separation. I know that's a lot, but that's kind of everything that's happened, and I wanted to get it out there. 今日も見てくれてありがとうございました。またね。See you. I love you. Stay well.